Good morning, distance learners. We are reading chapters 10, 11, and 12 today with Hope from the Sky for Ranger. It's very exciting, so let's see what happens next. Claire looked up, searching the sky. A few rescue helicopters were buzzing around in the distance, but they were too far away to see her. She wished she had a flag or a bed sheet to wave, something bigger and brighter than Nana's purple bandana. The house lurched. Claire braced herself to be thrown into the water, but it was only settling, still stuck between the tree. Claire hoped the trees were strong enough to hold it. She leaned over the gutter a bit to see if they were bending. Now I'm on the top of 85. When she did, she saw a flash of bright light, of bright orange. Dad's rain jacket from the boat. It was snagged on a jagged bit of wood floating by. Claire laid down on her belly. She stretched out her arm and tried to not think about the snakes wrapped around the life jacket earlier. When the edge of the sleeve brushed her hand, she closed her fingers around it and pulled it. Yes, Claire waved the bright jacket over her head, but she looked up. Even the distant helicopters had disappeared. "Come back," she shouted, though she knew no one could hear her. Claire's eyes filled, but she took a deep breath and spread out Dad's orange jacket on the roof. She made it as big as she could. Ranger flopped down on the jacket, but Claire shooed him off. "We have to make sure the helicopter people see that. When they come back, they'll find us." She told Ranger, "They have to come back. There are still people left behind." She leaned into his damp fur and gave him a squeeze. Dogs, too. Ranger licked Claire's hand and tried to be a good listener, but he was thirsty and he was hungry, and the helicopters were all gone. Claire tried to nap, but it was too hot. Yesterday's wind had threatened to blow the whole world apart, and today she couldn't even catch a breeze. She took out Bud, but not Buddy. It was all soggy, but she could still make out the words. She read a few chapters aloud to Ranger, Rules and Things, and number 83. Claire read as if an adult tells you not to worry and you weren't worried before. You better hurry up and start because you're already running late. Claire almost laughed. That wasn't really advice she needed. She had been worrying now for 3 days. She wished Nana...
Word.
Is she helping you open it?
Yeah.
That's fine. Thank you. She wished Nana were there to give a hug and remind her not to fret. Actually, no, she didn't want Nana anywhere near this awful smelly water. Hopefully, Nana was safe in the Superdome with food and water and people taking care of her. Claire wondered what time it was. The sun was finally setting, so it wasn't so hot. Would the helicopters come back? They couldn't just leave so many people behind, could they? Claire slapped a mosquito and wondered where her father was now. She tried not to think too much about why he hadn't come back, but she knew her father well enough to know that he would have come unless something had gone terribly wrong. She leaned over and stroked Ranger's head. "We need to get off this roof, dog," she whispered. "They'll be able to find Nana and Dad, and everything will be okay." They hadn't had anything to eat or drink all afternoon, so Claire untied the garbage bag, pulled out the water bottle, held it between her knees, unknotted the bag of bread, pulled out 2 pieces, handed one to Ranger, who scarfed it up. "I guess you were hungry too," Claire said, so she nibbled her own bread and shared the water with Ranger. It was strange to see the city with all the electricity out, and it was so quiet. Usually the neighbors were full of sounds of people talking and drinking sweet tea on their porches and playing music and laughing and grilling meat. But tonight the only sound was the gurgle of the floodwater. Ranger crept onto Dad's jacket. This time Claire let him stay. She curled up next to him and tried to ignore the mosquitoes whining in her ear and closed her eyes. Claire dreamed of helicopters that turned into giant insects and ropes that twirled into snakes. She woke to Ranger licking her cheek and barking. "What?" Claire blinked and leaned up on her elbows. The sky was a hazy pink color. It was getting warm again. She was out of water and she couldn't imagine spending another day on this roof. Why couldn't the dog have let her sleep a little longer? Everybody should be reading with me in their book. We're on page 89. But Ranger kept barking. When he stopped just for a moment, Claire heard another sound, the buzz of a helicopter. It was coming from the river, headed right for her. "Oh, here!" she shouted, even though no one on the chopper could have heard her. "Over here!" Claire grabbed her father's jacket, stood up, and waved it in a long arc over her head. "Over here!" Claire squinted up at the big brown helicopter against the blue morning sky and said a silent prayer. "Please, God, let them see me." And there is Claire standing on her roof, waving the jacket. Chapter 12, Helicopter Rescue. She is very faith-filled. I like that. We're at 92. Soon the helicopter was overhead. Wind from its spinning rotor blasted hot air onto the roof. Claire stared up into the whirling blades. "They see us," she shouted to Ranger. A side door opened and a man in orange suit appeared. He waved down at her and Claire waved back. He turned away for a moment and the next thing Claire knew, he was dangling a harness on a cable, dropping it down from the helicopter toward the roof. He wore a blue helmet, black gloves on his hands, and black boots. There were swimming fins hanging from his waist. Claire hoped that it didn't mean they were going back in the water. Almost anywhere sounded better than this roof, though. Claire pulled Ranger close. She grabbed her father's jacket, stuffed it in her garbage bag, and tied the bag closed just as the man's boots touched down on the roof. "Hi, I'm Sarah," the person said. "Oh," Claire started. The man dangling from the cable wasn't a man at all. "You're a girl." "Yep, and I'm also your rescue swimmer." Sarah unclipped the cable from her harness and waved up at the helicopter. "Let's get you out of here, okay?" "Yes, please," Claire said, and she watched the cable swing as someone pulled it back into the helicopter. She looked at Sarah's swim fins and then at the mucky water. "Do we have to swim?" "Nope," Sarah said and pointed upward to the helicopter. Now they're lowering some sort of giant metal laundry basket down on the cable. "You're getting a lift." When the basket got close enough, Sarah reached out and pulled it until it was resting on the roof between Claire and Ranger. "Now," Sarah said, "I need you to climb into the basket, sit down, and stay put. Keep your arms and legs inside so you're safe when you get up in the helicopter. And once you get up there, follow the directions of the person inside." Okay, Claire started to climb into the basket, getting her bag. Then she looked back at Ranger. She couldn't leave him behind. Sarah seemed to read her mind. "Don't worry," she said. "There's room for your dog." She held Claire's hand to balance her as she settled in the basket. Then she lifted Ranger by his middle and plopped him in beside her. "Ready?" Sarah asked. "Aren't you coming?" Claire said. She hadn't imagined dangling in the air all by herself. "I'll go up on my harness after you're safe," Sarah said. "All set?" Olivia?
My mom's friend is named Sarah.
She is? Very cool. And your dad works for the Coast Guard. Does he fly the helicopters?
Yes.
Very neat. So Sarah could have easily been Olivia's dad rescuing people. This is what he does do. All right, so let's find out what happens. She's about to go up in the basket. Claire's heart thudded in her chest, but she nodded. She wrapped one arm around her garbage bag and the other arm around Ranger. Sarah held the guide wire with one hand. She waved at the helicopter and then the steel cable lifted Claire and Ranger from the roof. "Remember, hands inside," Sarah shouted as the basket began to spin. "I'll see ya up there." Claire's stomach lurched as the basket twirled. She squeezed her eyes closed and felt the dog's warm body lean against her. Finally, she opened her eyes and looked out over her neighborhood. Claire gasped. It was as if Lake Pontchartrain, which is the lake in New Orleans, had swallowed up all of the city. The black water was everywhere. Only the tops of the trees and rooftops stuck out. Off in the distance, on the other side of the bridge, she could see some dry streets. Was that where Mr. Robinson had taken Nana? The roar of the helicopters got louder and louder until Claire was right beneath it. "Stay right there," a man called from an open door. When the basket was level with the door, he reached out to pull Claire and Ranger inside. The basket slid onto the helicopter floor. "You all right?" the man asked as he took Claire's hand. Claire nodded and let him help her climb out. "Have a seat on the floor over there," he said. "We're going to take you to the highway." So there is Claire and Ranger being pulled up into the helicopter.
How's the girl gonna get out?
It could be a Coast Guard helicopter. It could be a military helicopter. Both. Coast Guard is the military, but Coast Guard fly their own helicopters. Olivia, what color are Coast Guard helicopters?
They're orange and white.
Orange and white.
Or sometimes yellow.
And sometimes yellow. This helicopter they said was black or brown. That is the type of helicopters that the Army and Air Force use, and so they're often called rescue helicopters. There's also medical helicopters. It could be any of them. Class. We're not finished yet, so I'd like to finish. I have two friends with hand raised, so I'm going to take Aubrey and Nick's questions, and then we'll continue. Aubrey, your trash won't bite you. Stop. Nicholas.
Yes, well, my mom actually has been to New Orleans.
Yes, but hopefully not during the time of this. All right, let's turn the page. We are now on the last page of the chapter, 98. Buses will be waiting at the highway to take everyone to the shelter. Ranger climbed out of the basket too. The helicopter was packed with people and full of strong smells: gasoline, floodwater, and wet wool blankets. Claire pulled Ranger over to a spot away from the door next to an older lady who reminded her of Nana. She watched the helicopter door until Sarah climbed back inside. Then the doors closed and they started moving. Where? Claire wasn't sure, Sophie. Soon she couldn't stop thinking about all the flooded neighborhoods, the crowds of people walking through the rivers of muck on the streets. Where were they all going, and how would she ever find her family among them? So tomorrow we're going to read chapter 13, Turned Away. Okay, friends, I hope you enjoy. The adventure is really good. See you soon.